there are some of my colleagues who participated to this very exciting project. It was probably one of the best project and most intense that I did in my life. It took place in Ethiopia. It was just before the elections in 2015. And we had a tremendous opportunity to look at and to research hate speech ahead of the Ethiopian election with significant resources, which allowed us to not just focus on hate speech, but do something that I thought was important, and sort of resisted the tendency to just focus on the darker aspect of tension in ahead of political context, but actually be able to locate hate speech in the broad variety of conversation that occurred ahead of this particular event. And what I would like to do is reflect on that experience in hindsight through the perspective that is offered by Ethiopia today, which is a country profoundly at conflict in ways that very few would have expected back in 2014 and 2015 when we did the project, and asking ourselves in very candid ways if we could have done things differently. And this question is not just for ourselves as researchers, for those involved in the project, but it's a question that many academics, policymakers, NGOs, Facebook, regulators in general ask themselves and should ask themselves. So let me get straight into it. The project was called Meshachal, that in Amharic means tolerance. And it took place, as I said, 2013 and 2015. All the results of the project are fully available online. So I will sort of skip over a certain aspect and focus on the key elements. So Ethiopia in 2013 and 2015 and Ethiopia today are very different countries. So when we did this project, Ethiopia was still very much in control of the EPRDF coalition that came to power in 1991 after 20 years of civil war. Within the coalition, the Tigrayan People Liberation Front and had a strong hegemonic position. And the project that was developed by the TPLF/EPRDF of ethnic federalism was definitely contested, but it was hegemonic. It was still standing in institutional ways and in terms of like allowing certain forms of control, state building and nation building. And the problem we had, and this is a key element in my presentation, is in 2014 and 2015, we had to deal with a government that seems all powerful and controlling. A government that many others around the world was building a narrative of proliferating hate speech, the need to contain hate speech. And our project had to deal with that aspect. In a way, we were politically sensitive to the situation we were in and the actors, the most powerful actors we had to relate to. And these had implication in the way in which we defined hate speech in our own project. So if we move to 2020 and 2021, Ethiopia, as I said before, looks like a completely different country. And the EPRDF has been dissolved. The TPLF has been ousted from power, or some would say sort of ousted itself in an attempt to sort of reclaim its position, its importance, so much so that Ethiopia is now at war with itself. The Tigray war has been going on for like more than 6 months now. So the ethnic federalist project that was at the same time holding the country together and making it fall apart in a paradoxical way, has been replaced by another nation building project. And someone may expect that it's not easy to replace a big nation building project with just another one. It's not like changing policies along the way. And putting aside the war in Tigray, also the violence between different ethnic communities in Ethiopia after kind of the honeymoon that came after the new prime minister was selected to power in April 2018 has become much more intense than before. So this is like to set the scene for those, not for the panelists, but for those who are participating in this seminar who are not that well versed with the long or more recent history of Ethiopia. So getting into the project, what we had to deal with was a very common challenge, as I said before. These dealing with a situation where there was a sense of moral panic, there was on which the government was riding, and we didn't want with our project to offer more ammunition to this government, to the Ethiopian government, EPRDF, TPLF-led government, to sort of tell, you see, we told you there is a speech. We told you that we need to contain this space. And here's the academic research that is offering us the findings, and they're justifying what we're doing. And this is what I put here, just a quote of a court case where activists, political activists, were flagged as terrorists because of their activities. And it had to play a role. You know, this is part of the political sensitivity of defining its speech and working with a definition. But what we were able to do, and this is, we thought it was quite unique, and we don't want to sound arrogant, but we would love to replicate, or the other could replicate something that resonate with what we did. So what seems to be quite common in research/policy on hate speech, you know, that involves donor countries, international organization, researchers, NGOs, and so forth, is a tendency to sort of see the government as the antagonist and someone to engage, but not too much. And we thought of doing something different. We thought of, from the get-go, to create this, because of the convening power of academia, to create this table where different stakeholders, very different stakeholders, were sitting one next to each other. And so we had representative from the government of Ethiopia, we had representative from the opposition, which might sound simple, but across the table, there were individuals on the government side. Shimelis Kemal, that used to be the state minister of communication, who a few years earlier was the public prosecutor who had put in jail for 2 years one of the opposition figures that was sitting on the opposite side of the table. So you may imagine the tension in the room, especially at the beginning, and with colleagues from Addis Ababa universities, political activists as well. So it was a very complex attempt, but I think a very important one, to sort of, again, using the convening power of academia to sort of bring different actors together and sort of like agree around a common definition that was coming from literature, coming from the situation we were all facing, but also endorsed to some extent, but very different individuals. And every time we had 3 or 4 different events of this kind, and every time some of the findings were becoming available, we were sharing them first with these forum of individuals. So the key point that I wanna discuss today, and I guess Nicole or Martin will tell me how much time I have left, is this decision tree, which in a way is an algorithm, and why we decided to do things the way we did. So in a lot of research on hate speech, I think computational social science is taking an increasing important role, and maybe we can deal with that in the question and answer. But it's often quite obscure how things are the way they are, and why certain utterances are flagged the way they were. So we decided to take a different route. We could rely on a quite significant group of human coders, and all of them from Ethiopia, apart from one. So Amharic speakers, and living outside of Ethiopia because of the political sensitivity of the issue. And so we decided to have a series of questions that were being asked to the different posts taken from Facebook, and addressing different issues. The first one is, what is the target, the one on top? The accusation, the target is a group that is targeted because of ethnic, religious, or belongings or gender. And this is to comply with international jurisprudence and where the political is sort of put aside. And The next question is about the content of the utterance, which kind of terms are being used and so forth, which is quite common and resonates with research on dangerous speech and fear speech and so forth. In the next step, it becomes about the action that is encouraged. So there is no call to action, then becomes what we define as offensive speech. But then there is a call to insult, boycott, discriminate, and so forth, then it fits into our definition. But the last one is the most important, and that where I want to reflect on. So it's about the imbalances of power. So if there is a derogatory term or vitriolic statement that attacks people based on their ethnic or religious belonging and incites people to do something about it, is the target group able to defend itself, yes or no? So in the case of Myanmar, for example, where a minority group that had almost no control of the army, the political apparatus, and so forth, was the target of violence, that question would have led to very clear answers. There is, as it was, speech which is likely to lead to violence. But the problem is, and this is what I want to reflect on in the question and answer, also a reflection on this project, a lot of these vitriolic speech was against the Tigrayan minority. And the Tigrayan minority, the TPLF, was in control of the army, of the intelligence, of most of the institution. And so was it able to defend itself? The answer was yes. But, and I say it here, and maybe I will go back to it at the end. Here's the, we weren't playing any game with the government. We just sort of agreed on this definition. But at the same time, if we didn't power down what we saw because of the ability of the main targets to defend themselves, we would have created those series of political ammunition that could have been used by an all-powerful government to censor, attack, imprison, and so forth. But in the hindsight of what happened 3 and 4 years down the line, if we had used a more generic, a less contextually specific definition of hate speech, we could have rang the alarm bell and saying there is a brewing sentiment of anger, of vitriol against this group, that it might lead, as it did, to widespread violence across. So this is the tension. This is like the reflective aspect of this research. I will sort of fly through it. This is what, and everything is available online. If you Google Murchard Child, you will land on our report. So as I said before, we found a very small fraction of utterances that fits into a spectrum that goes from offensive to hate speech and to dangerous speech. And this also is just a way to reflect on like the different conceptual schools and influence that we had. But again, it's probably less relevant to the point, to the key point that I make here. And I will just spend a little bit more time on this one, not too much, and just to highlight another aspect of Murchard Child that was significant, and it often it's not possible to do research on hate speech for a number of reasons, because when we did our research in Ethiopia, the internet 2014, 2015, surprisingly for some countries, like if you are from Kenya, but not in the case of Ethiopia, the penetration was relatively limited. So was Facebook, and Facebook, there is a way to think of Facebook as the internet. So it was possible to just sample the whole of Facebook and individuals, pages, and groups that pass a certain thresholds. And so what we were able to do was to, as I showed in the previous slide, to sort of put hate speech in context. So sort of trying to, again, resist the sense of moral panic, or like build into research that by studying hate speech obviously finds hate speech, and there is a tendency to sort of generalize that as the scare, the majority of utterances. And so, but also framing hate speech within these broader categories of going against, and then the other one is going towards. We sort of like allowed to see beyond what is defined as hate speech, what are the other fractures at a political level? And how can you put hate speech into a continuum of tensions that can be mapped for what they are, rather than only select the narrow filter through which to interpret a society and its conflicts. Moving to the Ethiopia today, and I know that my the next presentation is going to be about that one, and it is a very different country. This is a map of some key spots in the conflict in Tigray, as it was back in when it started back in November 2020, and the situation is, as I said at the beginning, dramatically different from one anyone could have expected, like 5 years before. It started with large protests that led to dramatic changes in power dynamics and power balances within the government. The loss of the TPLF of its hegemonic position, the dismantling of the ethnic federalist project, and this sort of like paradoxical transition, which is, and again, we can discuss this later, has the ethnic federalist project get dismantled, it's when ethnic tension and violence gets to its highest. And it could be a feature of outer political transition. It could be a result of the imposition of a framework onto people, which that many people felt tight and overpowering, and to which they reacted. But it's also the legacy of a project that for some head work was certainly had produced effect. So clearly, a project like Mechachal done today would be done in very different ways, and the results would probably be quite different. A last couple of points before I pass the torch. It was also interesting how Mechachal was framed and was discussed in other academic papers, debates, reports, and so forth. So the fact that we didn't find as much as speech as people thought was seen as a problem, was seen as a fallacy of the project. Of course, I'm sure we did mistakes, and as everybody does, and I'm sure our system wasn't perfect. But the thing is that I want to reaffirm and reclaim is that it was transparent that we did that for a reason, and so our low count, our not building into moral panics was meant to achieve a specific results. And we could have done it differently. If we had done it differently, as I said before, we might have provided tools for some, those with political power, to take action, and for others, those observing a situation in Ethiopia, to possibly see what was yet to happen, but then happen in dramatic ways. So this is the last 2 points that I want to make, and I think it's just reiteration, something that I said already. So first of all is the tension between normativity and political sensitivity. So maybe I'm repeating myself, but I think this point is important. There is no universal accepted definition of hate speech, but had we been less politically sensitive, we might have and had adopted a definition of hate speech that didn't contain some of the question I showed earlier on about power imbalances in particular. We could have built into a greater understanding of how things were just about to change, how the apathy that was surrounding the election of 2014-2015 was not reflective of how the Ethiopian population had accepted the dominance of the TPLF, which won the election almost with 100% of the vote, but was actually an indication of how election that had been staged for international observer and to find legitimacy had stopped to be recognized as legitimate tool for transferring power, and individuals were preparing to take things into their hands as they did. So working outside of the electoral context, as it happened in the case of the Arab Spring and in other cases. And so political sensitivity is essential. It's something that is said all the time when we discuss research that connects pure academic research and impact on the ground, but it has its downsides. And the final point is what I called the paradoxes of policy and academic fashion in studying digital media. And for a long time in the 1990s and in the 2000s, and I'm not that old, but I'm old enough to have been part of that generation of research and debates, there seems to be this like obsession with the liberation power of digital technology. So if we had to do research in the space, he had to add the word good governance, accountability, and participation, and so forth. And now it seems in a kind of a schizophrenic way to have kind of turned that tide. The tide turned like a few years ago. And there is an obsession on hate speech, on disinformation and misinformation. And the risk is often that, following one trend to the other, and we miss important elements of what is actually happening. We sort of like impose frameworks of what needs to be studied. And we need to find a balance there. And because we are not in that space yet, and there is a greater need to sort of connect those elements and be ready to study what is rather than what we either expect to be, or we wish will happen, or we are afraid it will happen sooner or later. I will leave it at that for now. I will pass it on. I don't know who is next.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Eugenio, for updating us on this important project, which was done also with colleagues, some of who I can see are in the participant list. So our colleague Matti Pohonen, who was speaking at an earlier seminar as well, was very much involved with this. So let's turn it over to Abdi Fattah now. We have a little bit of a change in the agenda, but Abdi Fattah, if you're ready.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you and we can see you. It's perfect. Thank you.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you very much. And thank you once again for giving me this opportunity. I am really privileged and blessed to be joining this panel discussion on a very interesting topic, which is new mostly, I mean, in my country and in personal, but very interesting actually, and very concerning at the same time in the context of my country. So unfortunately, I don't have a presentation, but I will briefly discuss my points, and hopefully everybody will get a small understanding of what I'm speaking about. So I will be mainly focusing about Somalia, but I will also briefly talk about Kenya and Djibouti, especially on the issue of artificial intelligence and content moderation in social media, but also generally, before we start talking about these elements, we need to think about every time I participate platforms and panel discussions about whether it's digital rights or internet freedom or freedom of expression in the online space or content moderation by social media platforms, I always go back to the issue of accessibility of internet itself, because I believe that's the main foundation of this whole discussion we are having. So we can start the question, who is accessing internet in our region, in the Horn of Africa in general, but also in my country, for instance, in Somalia. And the question of access nowadays becomes very critical, because that's where everything starts. So internet is a lifeline for Somalia. It has been a lifeline for Somalia since the breakout of civil war. It has been our only way to communicate with our beloved ones outside and inside the country. It has been the only way, for instance, for us to get money or receive money from, like, through wiring or through remittance from outside the country. It has been a lifeline for us to express our views and opinion lately, especially with the rise of social media platforms and other online platforms, websites. And so it's very important. We look at the inequality. For instance, large people of our people are not accessing the internet, so they are completely excluded and disconnected from the digital world. So that's also a concern, and I mean, I think we should first look at that with that perspective. Now, coming to the topic itself, there is hate speech, in especially clan-based hate speech in the context of Somalia. Our society lives through clan lines and clan groups, if you understand what I mean, especially in most of African context. Communities live through, groups that they belong to each other. So there has been a rise on clan-based hate speech on social media in the context of Somalia. Clan groups established on Facebook and have been mainly created to support each other and, to kind of raise funds, for instance. But sometimes these groups attack and say something sensitive about other clans, especially those who are marginalized communities, or what we know as minority clans, less powerful, compared to the powerful clans. So that have been rising on social media, especially on Facebook, where large number of Somalis are connected and are using both inside the country and outside the country, and it's unregulated. It's basically a battleground for the different clans. There is also what we call incitement of violence. And this is happening in the context of complete absence of community standards that, and lack of reporting tools that are translated in Somali language. So there is also incitement of violence, especially during the election season. At the moment, we are having the election, so there's a lot of incitement of violence that is happening on social media, especially on Facebook, for instance. There were two government officials actually with higher government portfolios who were openly claiming that opposition candidates, for instance, should be targeted and are seen as the main barriers to Somalia's peace building process. Instead of engaging them constructively, that they were sharing videos and posts on social media that certain individuals who were members of the opposition groups are actually should be targeted violently. And unfortunately, like 3 weeks ago, there was violent clashes in Mogadishu. I'm not sure if you are aware about that as a result of the political crisis in the country. But we also believe that posts on Facebook were really seen as the main drivers of what was fueling this the tension. So each group from the government and from the opposition groups, they were posting a lot of incitement of violence within social media, and also including the clan-based, hate speech. So some of those posts that were shared on Facebook were purely clan, based hate speech, and which was actually fueling the violence. So we are having that crisis at the moment. We have seen it like in the past 2 years, and especially before the election, and things are getting actually worse at the moment with social media. There is also an online attacks and harassment against critical voices, like for instance, journalists and activists. And when I'm saying this, I'm coming from a perspective of myself and as a digital rights or human rights activist who live in a very dangerous and polarized country. So there's a lot of online attacks and harassment against critical voices, journalists and activists on social media, who are, in their line of work or simply expressing their opinions in social media platforms. So we sometimes have to sort ourselves in a self-censored position, and many of us remain silenced because of these growing, digital attacks. Another issue that we have been witnessing over the past 3 years is what we call state-sponsored trolls and propagandists, which has been very serious issue over the last 3 years in this country, and have been silencing many critical voices, basically spreading state propaganda and attacking anyone who criticizes the government or questions the status quo. This was also a government policy, and we were actually wondering the money that was used to in this campaign, which could have been used to invest in public service or do other or for other tangible work. So that's also another concern that we have been seeing in the context of Somalia. In relation to content moderation, especially with social media platforms, it's not available at the moment. Nothing is translated in Somali language. Social media platforms like Facebook or Twitter, community standards, and other reporting tools are not translated in Somali language. So people even don't understand and have less understanding on how to deal with this issue. So we another point that I wanted to raise is so there is also a plan for launching a biometric system in the country, basically creating national database or ID, national ID for Somalia, and it's entirely, completely controlled by the National Intelligence and Security Agency, which is a very big concern for us, for all activists actually, especially in relation with data privacy and data protection, and the concerns that we have already raised with the authorities that this might be misused or abused, in some cases, and as we have seen as in many other countries. So this is also a concern that's coming for us, in which we have been raising recently. Basically, that's the general landscape for Somalia. Another point before I leave that one, especially in relation to the hate speech, this clan-based conflict that was existing in the country for ages and ages, and it has been happening in Somalia since long time. But what we are seeing right now is sometimes, like for instance, certain communities are fighting in a particular area, and in social media, there is also the platforms becomes another battleground with the same groups that belong to each of the clans that are physically fighting in certain areas. So that's also a very big concern, which we have seen both in 2018 and 2019 in two conflicted areas. That's for Somalia. For Kenya, and I'm sure many of you are aware of this concern about the Kenya new Huduma Center, something called, which is a new biometric system that collects sensitive information about citizens, such as contact details, fingerprints, locations, persons, profession, travel history, bank accounts, basically exposing personal information of the citizens. It has been a really concern in Kenya, and it's still in court, and with a lot of critics and activists, criticizing this new biometric system. Let me also say something about Djibouti. So this tiny Djibouti, there's complete internet censorship in this country. As we know, there's zero political pluralism in this country at all, and it's ruled by an authoritarian leader. The civic space is entirely closed, and many websites and other online platforms have either been blocked or restricted. And citizens are not able to express their views and opinions on social media platforms. In fact, several critics have been arrested and for posting for critical posts they shared on Facebook. There were 3 bloggers actually who were arrested in 2017 and 2018 for social media posts. Basically, the government controls the entire media, or whether it's digital or print landscape in that country, and nobody's able to express their opinion. So it's completely closed civic space country, and there's zero actually participation of citizens in discussions around social media, whether that's Facebook or Twitter or any other platforms. So I will stop it there for the 3 countries, and back to you.
Great, thank you so much, Abdi Fattah. So we can turn now to Kinfe. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I don't know, can you see me? My video is on, but I cannot see the mirror view. Don't know what's wrong with my computer. Yeah, can you see me?
No.
Okay, I don't know what's wrong with the video, but it's on. I don't even see myself in there. Can I just continue without video?
Okay, we can hear you very well.
Yeah, okay, so
we'll miss seeing you though.
yeah, I don't know what the problem with the video. The video is on, but you see I'm turning it on and off, but it's not showing my face. I don't know why. Probably it's because on the computer. Yeah.
It's okay. You can just go ahead.
Yeah, let me go ahead. Okay, thank you very much. So my focus will be on the Ethiopian case. Since I'm a lawyer, I will talk a little bit about some of the legal aspects of online hate speech in Ethiopia. Just before that, just to build on what our colleague earlier said, in the past few years, particularly since the public protests that have been, the key factors for unseating the previous government, hate speech has been thriving in the Ethiopian cyberspace. And I think a host of factors are responsible for this proliferation of online hate speech in Ethiopia. One of, I think, the key factor is that Ethiopian politics has always been deeply polarized. And this has, I think, become even more polarized in the past few years, particularly in the past 3 years after, the so-called reform. There has been a very divisive political climate in Ethiopia, and this has been, I think, very significant factor in fueling online hate speech along ethnic and religious lines. But the other important factor that I should highlight is the role of the Ethiopian diaspora. The Ethiopian diaspora, which is a very considerable online presence, has a significant role in the domestic political mobilization in the country. So I think the proliferation of online hate speech in Ethiopia, I think, is mainly driven by the diaspora that are, against the political system that has been in place for the past 3 decades in the country, which my colleague earlier said has been abolished, but I don't think that's the case. It's still in place, and I think it's still one of the sources for the divisive political environment in Ethiopia. So that's the second factor. The other is, I think, internet penetration and use has grown in a considerably manner in the past few years. Currently, the level of internet penetration, according to government data, is around 20%. And social media uses pretty much the significant factor there. So in Ethiopia, for example, Facebook has around 12 million users. So the growth in access to the internet has played a role in magnifying the ethnic divide, the religious divide in the country. But there are also ongoing developments that are further contributing to the problem of hate speech online in Ethiopia. I think one is the government itself, the current government, which came to power following the public protests in the 2015 and 2016 in some parts of the country. I think has put into practice which the previous regime had planned on paper, which is to employ what are generally called social media warriors to push government narratives. But often these online activists, allegedly hired by the government, I think they may have contributed to the proliferation of hate speech in Ethiopia. A recent study by the European Institute of Peace recently in April, they found that online hate speech in Ethiopia is thriving mainly through the comment sections where people react to the comments that these activists post online. So there's also a role for the government in the increasing problem of online hate speech in Ethiopia. The other is the ongoing political developments in the country. As mentioned earlier, there is an ongoing civil war. You could call it, it's an international armed conflict because it involves several countries. So this war, I think, has further pushed the country in that respect. For example, recently, the head of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church has explicitly stated that there is an ongoing genocide in Ethiopia. The US government has said there's an ethnic cleansing in that part of the country. And I think the online speech vitriol that has been going on for the past few years have played, I think, in my view, a direct role in enabling and in facilitating these atrocities in the country. There's also an intensifying insurgency in Oromia, and I think hate speech may have some role in giving some ground or power to those actors in launching attacks against certain ethnic groups in some parts of the country. That's also the case in another region called Benishangul-Gumuz. So currently, these different factors are playing a key role in the growth of online hate speech in Ethiopia. And I think the problem is going to get even worse now because I think internet penetration is going to go even higher with 2 new telecom operators due to join the market in the coming few months. The ongoing war and conflicts here and there, they're going to further fuel the problem. So having said that, let me just talk about the main topic of my presentation, that's regarding the steps that have been taken by various relevant actors in addressing the problem of hate speech in Ethiopia. So I have identified 3 actors here. The first important actor is the government. So the government has taken 2 types of steps in addressing the problem of online hate speech. As I said, don't forget that the government has a role in, in enabling, or at least in creating an enabling environment for the spread of online hate speech in Ethiopia. But even then, it has taken 2 types of measures. One is legislative measure. Some of you may know in 2020, the government has enacted a hate speech legislation. And also recently, a new media legislation has been enacted that hopes to regulate online media along with traditional legacy media. But importantly, the hate speech legislation introduces some important content moderation standards that social media platforms need to follow. For example, it requires them to take down hate speech within 24 hours. It also requires them to enact context-tailored content moderation policy for the country, among other obligations. But still, this law has not been put into practice due to various reasons. especially the hate speech aspect of the law. There is another aspect of the law that's regarding disinformation. A number of journalists have been charged, arrested under the disinformation elements of that law. But the hate speech aspect of the law is yet to be tested. And obviously, Ethiopia has no significant leverage to force social media platforms like Facebook to comply with the law. But still, that's one measure which I think the government thought would help in addressing the problem of the hate speech in the country. The media legislation is new, so it's very hard to tell at this point how it would help in taming the problem of hate speech in Ethiopia. The second important aspect of the government measure has been network disruption. Ethiopia has been shutting down the internet as well as other telecom services in the past few years, among others, to tackle the problem of hate speech. Just to give you an example, for example, in 2020, following the assassination of a famous Oromo singer, the government has disrupted, the internet throughout the country, and this is mainly, I think, to address the hate speech. And hundreds of people have died, of course, even though the government, later shut down the internet due to dangerous, hateful speech spread through social media platforms, particularly through Facebook Live, YouTube, online streaming services. So network disruption has been, the go-to measure for the government, because it is, I think, very expedient. Because the telecom operator is a monopoly, it can just require them to shut down the internet whenever they want. So that has been the most recurrent measure taken by the government to address the problem of hate speech, but that also proved ineffective. In that case, in the assassination of the singer, as you may have heard in the news, hundreds have died and lots of destruction have happened in different parts of the country. So disrupting the network was totally ineffective. So this is how the government has been trying to address the problem. Social media platforms, as I said earlier, the main social media platform in Ethiopia is Facebook. YouTube is also widely used, especially by activists, both diaspora and local, to spread what could be considered as speech inciting violence and discrimination. According to my research, Facebook is yet to take meaningful measure in addressing the problem of online hate speech in Ethiopia. In 2019, it opened an office in Kenya to address the problem of online hate speech in the continent. And it also promised to hire around 100 content moderators, including those, hopefully, who would understand the local context in African countries, including Ethiopia. But I'm not sure if that has been implemented yet. Probably Facebook has done well in terms of addressing disinformation and fake news in Ethiopia, because it has funded third parties to address misinformation online in the Ethiopian context, because there are a number of moderators that work on that aspect of online content moderation. Recently, Access Now, the international human rights organization, had launched a campaign pointing out the grave problem of online hate speech in Ethiopia, and Facebook somehow responded to that campaign. They say that Ethiopia currently is now on their highest priority, and they would be doing lots of monitoring and allocate human resources to address the problem. But again, the linguistic diversity in the country, we have around more than 80 languages spoken in the country, would make it still harder for social media platforms to meaningfully address the problem. I think my colleague earlier also mentioned about the lack of content moderations, community guidelines in local languages. As to my knowledge, today there is no Ethiopian language community standard adopted by social media platforms. So that's regarding measures taken by social media platforms. Just to highlight, I think Facebook and YouTube have been very instrumental in the spread of online hate speech in Ethiopia. Facebook Live is used widely by diaspora-based activists who have a very large following locally, like in hundreds of thousands. And because of the linguistic challenge, as well as the lack of the artificial intelligence, the algorithms that social media platforms use are not trained in the local context. Often such streaming is not taken down quickly. Often they are taken down once they are reported by people. As you all know, YouTube allows them to leave the video after they streamed it online. So then often it gets taken down after being reported by some volunteers. This takes me to the effort of some volunteers in Ethiopia, particularly civil society activists, in addressing the problem. There's one, I think, probably effective effort in addressing online hate speech in Ethiopia. There's a network against hate speech in Ethiopia. It's a recently launched network. It's kind of a loose group that's active online, particularly on Facebook and Twitter. They actively report to the social media platforms, including on YouTube, when they come across speech that incites violence and discrimination against ethnic and religious groups. Now, but this is not a well-resourced, organized group. They are not always active in dealing with the problem. But also they come sometimes under criticism for bias. Some activists from Oromia and Tigray, they allege that this network is biased towards them. And it sides with some ethnic groups. So there's this complaint, but there are also emerging civil society organizations in Ethiopia that take other steps in addressing the problem through, for example, raising awareness, so on and so forth. So that's all that I have for now, and I'm happy to answer any questions later. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that very, very clear and interesting presentation, Kimfe. So that was great. We're going to open it now to any questions from the participants. So feel free to put any of your questions in chat, or if you also raise your hand and have a question, I can allow you to speak. So that's another option. As everyone is thinking about their questions, I'd like to just put one question to the panelists. And it seems like, from my understanding, there's been a push in terms of thinking about positive messaging. So while the emphasis, and you see this very much in Europe and North America as well, that one way of dealing with hate speech is not to restrict it. It's very difficult to fully monitor all of the hate speech and take it down, but we need to be flooding these social media platforms with positive messaging. And my understanding is that there have been some initiatives in some African countries to think about what this kind of peace or positive messaging might look like. I just wanted you all of you to sort of reflect on that and see whether or not you think this is an antidote, whether or not it would really have any kind of effect in addressing the very serious concerns around online hate speech that you see from your research and from your work. So whoever would like to go first?
I can jump in quickly, that is okay, because I struggle with my connection for the past 20 minutes. Now it seems to be working, and I will seize the moment. And so it's a great in principle, and in practice, what we have seen through our research and also connecting with other experiences is I participated in this large study by UNESCO called Countering Online Hate Speech, and then that's one of the things that we were saying. The problem with these is that it has led over time in what some anthropologists or some critics would call ventriloquism. So the tendency of these organizations, being like the UN, being Facebook, being governments, to sort of select and sort of push messages that definitely are going in the right direction when it comes to creating a common ground, or wishing for a richer kind of debate, but sort of sits either over or below what actually happens. So if this was based on a granularity, on the understanding of how humor can diffuse hate, and as it is already existing, and sort of leveraging it, there's sort of like a, you know, an algorithmic ways to sort of bring what is to the fore, it might work. But when it's kind of artificially injected through the co-opting certain groups into saying what those organizations wish should be said, I'm quite pessimistic that it's going to make any difference.
Would anyone else like to come in? Hello?
Yes, yes. Can I? Sorry.
Please.
Yeah. So yeah, it's really very important, but it depends on now the context. I mean, in my country, for instance, we definitely need to first understand what's hate speech. Our community needs to understand what's hate speech. We need to raise public awareness of the problem, and then of course supporting people who are targets of hate speech. Sharing a positive message of tolerance and pluralism is really great, but contexts are different. So from where I come from, there's very limited understanding of the issue itself. Many people don't understand it, don't see it as a big problem when it's a big problem. So, and that's why we as an institution and as an online community organize and hold platforms and events around the issue itself. So it's a matter of public awareness, but also it's also a matter of, you know, making people first understand the issue as a concern, and then addressing it with exactly what you suggest, which is really great. Thank you.
Kinfei, did you want to come in on this?
I don't have anything new to say. I really agree with what Ignio earlier said.
Okay, great. We have a very long and Martin, yes.
Thank you. Yeah, we just would like to add one aspect to your question, and that is the question whether the three of you can give us an assessment of what's the feeling of the normal population about this hate speech issue is. Are they mostly part of this clan structure? Are they either at one side or the other that is fighting online and in real life, or is this just a minority problem and the majority of normal citizens are not really into hate speech? Which would be, so my question is inspired just by data we have from Germany. We have a lot of data that says that 80–90% of Germans are quite civil and don't like hate speech and feel the obligation to do something against it, but still online comment sections are flooded with hate speech. And so there's a asymmetry of many people don't like it, but a small group of activists, of, I don't know, state-sponsored trolls or whatever, are pushing a lot of hate speech into these public spheres. And I would be interested what you think, whether it would be the same in Ethiopia, or whether it would be different there.
May I jump in? Okay, I think in Ethiopia, as I said earlier, the level of internet use and penetration is limited. So hate speech is spread mainly by, in my view, the informed, educated political elite, most of which is, I think, is from the diaspora. But it's very hard to say that, having seen what's happening in Tigray, for example, because trained professional soldiers, the way they kind of vent revenge against civilians, so on and so forth. But it's very hard for me at this point to say that hate speech is not a deeply embedded problem in Ethiopia. I think the overall political composition in Ethiopia, being it's a multi-ethnic country, I think even before the media, the internet, there were elements of hate speech. For example, when I grew up in Addis, you could see that there was common everyday sayings that are disparaging to some ethnic groups, minorities. So I tend to say that the problem could be more widespread than one could imagine. It should not be compared with the number of internet users that spread online hate speech. The problem is deeper because most of the people, I think, who are committing the real life physical atrocities in different parts of the country, they probably do not have access to social media platforms, but they just hear some messages, incitements, and they go ahead and commit very terrible things on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Unless anyone wants to come in, I will turn to another question. So we have a question from Mati. And Mati, I'm wondering if you'd like to, it's a very long, interesting question. Would you like to come in and ask the question? Can I unmute you if that's okay?
Sure, yeah. I don't have the video on, but can you hear me? Nicole, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so this kind of links to the previous discussion that, and first of all, thanks for the excellent presentation. So funnily, I was reading a New York Times article this morning dealing specifically with the ongoing crisis in Ethiopia, and that also included the online component. And I was reminded by two quotes from the article, which were by a researcher for Amnesty International. So the first quote goes, I'm sorry, the question is a bit long. So the first quote goes, "The battle is also one of narratives. The government frequently accuses critics and foreign news outlets of falling for TPLF propaganda, a charge made by supporters of Mr. Abiy, who recently demonstrated in New York outside the offices of the New York Times." And the second quote goes that restricted access and the high politicization of violence make it hard to establish the truth about much of anything in Tigray. And he added, so with these two quotes in mind, when we look at debates on content moderation, especially in the Western context, they're often premised around the idea of detecting certain types of information that are considered negative and bad, which then should be removed through big tech content moderation and either through human moderators or using increasingly artificial intelligence. So this, in a way, requires some form of being able to figure out what is the truth or the ground truth as the basis for identifying the types of speech that should be removed. So there's a certain categories, certain criteria for doing this, either by human moderators or by technology. So my question kind of goes around this, that when we look at such highly conflict-driven areas, both in Somalia and Ethiopia, can this type of model of content moderation that is based on identifying certain types of hate speech and disinformation apply as such to a conflict context, and as exemplified by the quotes from the New York Times, in very polarized cases where the very notion of this ground truth and the violence around it has become very politicized, especially around the civil war, and also linked to types of contested and contradictory truth about what is actually going on. And in a way, if we have this polarized contradictory truth going on, what role then around disinformation, hate speech, and around the broader debates, what role then can potentially big tech digital platforms such as Facebook have in trying to moderate or mediate such conflicting accounts? And what is the kind of role that they should have around this when the idea of what is actually going on itself is being contested? And are there possible any alternative models of how this could be considered or thought of? So a very long question. I hope it's not too complicated, but yeah, I was thinking around this when I was listening to the great presentations.
No, that's a great question, Mati, and I think it really gets to the heart of many of these issues, not just in the Horn of Africa, but elsewhere as well. So would any of our panelists like to start by trying to tackle this?
I can try to give it a go. requires some level of thinking. And no, as Nicole just said, you know, you illustrate that, you know, Ethiopia is an example that can be taken to many other geographic location and political context. And you know, as you said, the idea of a ground truth in a conflict is an oxymoron. It's what actually drives the conflict, and the winner will defy the ground truth at the end, and that's what has usually happened. And we are in a situation where also both parts in a conflict, even if one is overpowered by the other, could sort of promote their own. And I don't think there is a solution, and I don't think there is a fix, and a way to address this is recognize what are the competing truths, and rather than suppress one over the others, and sort of deepening what are the long historical markers of certain kind of affirmation, rather than flagging certain things as you know, bad news or like disinformation, and the other like is proper news, and so forth. Maybe I will pass it to the chair of the panelists as I think about it more, because I think something else can be said about that, but I need to make some connection in the.
Great. Abdi Fattah, Kinte, do you want to come in on this?
Yeah, so I really think that is a very fundamental question, particularly in the Ethiopian context, because it's not restricted just to the online sphere, but also in the legacy media. Now, each group has its own, you know, media, and it disseminates what it thinks is the truth. So this, I think, reflects the deeply divided, you know, political ecosystem that we have in the country. So I think when social media platforms start to take, you know, real action in dealing with the problem in Ethiopia, I think that's the challenge that they would face. For example, the content moderators that they're going to hire could be from one ethnic group, and you know, the kind of content that's going to be taken down often would be offending the others. So the, you know, feeling of bias and so on and so forth would arise. I also mentioned earlier regarding the network, which is kind of an experiment in civil society reporting speech that incites discrimination and violence in Ethiopia. So the complaint, I think, again reflects the divided environment, and there is no solution that could be addressed through automated or human-based content moderation. I think the solution probably lies in addressing the root cause of the problem. And I think the root cause of the problem for what we see online is the lack of political dialogue among the political elite. There needs to be a very grand bargain among, you know, divisive issues. Otherwise, I don't think artificial intelligence powered content moderation would ever address the problem. Thank you.
If I can circle back, as one problem that probably has been discussed and is also taking each country seriously, responding to the statements that are made by these these very companies. You know, Facebook and Twitter took the boldest move with the removal of Donald Trump, because they had a very clear understanding of the multiple layers at the legal level, at the historical level, and the political level. They could put that event into context. They could make sense of it in a way that, as stakeholders, they could take that role of being seen as like taking sides or favoring one side over the other, but they knew enough about the context to, and they were at that point in their own history to be able to do that. And actors like Facebook make claims that we're getting better in Myanmar, as Kimfe said, we are hiring all this, but their level of political complexity is so far from being reached that they will never make the bold move in Ethiopia or in Myanmar, because they simply don't understand the context. And they could do it. It would be incredibly interesting to see these companies making that bold move based on their own grassroots. They're both like being secure enough in their own bodies, institutional relevance to do that. But the reality of the attention it is given to the complexity of the conflict doesn't match at all the claims that are made at a public level and the promise that are being made. It's not like 200 more moderators that are going to make any difference when that conflict, as we said, can either be captured by the moderators themselves. They're going to do their own politics. There are a long example of Voice of America that was captured by anti-EPRDF groups and went on unchecked for like decades, despite all the claims. And the BBC did something similar. You know, the BBC Somali service has been captured by politics. People are writing letters to the BBC. The BBC doesn't do anything about it. Same story about Voice of America, because the claim is we set it up there using nice words like freedom of expression and giving like media to those who don't have media, but then not following through to that very promise. So much so that it causes more problems that it actually offers opportunities.
Well, thank you for that. Abdi Fattah, do you want to come in on this at all? I mean, particularly when Eugenio mentioned as well the BBC Somali service, it sort of makes you wonder, I know, given all of the challenges around content moderation of traditional media, of mass media, also in divided, you know, in complex situations like the Somali territories. You know, I know the BBC Somali service has been very controversial. So does that give you any hope or faith or thoughts that, you know, moderation on Facebook could somehow do it better and not also be politically captured in the same way?
Actually, we've been engagement with Facebook Africa policy team last few weeks and discussing about the same issue, content moderation. But I see two scenarios here. Well, it again goes back to the ethnic and clan, you know, based structure of our society. So, you know, a human-centered content moderation would definitely bring another, you know, conflicting issue, like, you know, kind of biased content moderation. Like, for instance, if they want to, of course, the local guys they hire might come from certain tribe or certain clan, which can be quite difficult. But I also see another complicated issue, which is basically, well, now what we have is problem is the offline context. You know, this deeply polarized and divided ethnic communities is existing in the offline context. You know, clan-based fighting has been part of our existence, let me say, for resource sharing, for other purposes, for you know, different reasons. And I believe that as a community, before even coming to the online platforms, we should be start discussing the way we can address the root causes of those problems using digital platforms. You know, then addressing it now and address like, you know, handing it over to entirely social media giants to do it for us. So yeah, so those are the two scenarios I would say. But there's really big concern on human-centered and AI, human-centered moderation. How reliable will it be in the context of Somalia or in the eyes of Somalis when we know that, you know, there's a lot of controversy happening in different areas.
Thank you for that. So I see Martin also has a question. Do you want to go ahead, Martin?
Yeah, it's just an information question. I posted it in the chat. It was just, I just wondered whether the situation, Abdi Fattah, you outlined for Somalia would be the same for Somaliland as well, because I just recently read some news reports about the very special situation there, and that would be interesting. What you from inside could tell us about that.
Well, to be honest, as a nation and as an individual, we mostly focus on Somalia, on the southern part of the country. Quite Somaliland is treated and looked at with a different perspective. So it's almost the same context, but it's slightly different because of the relative peace and relative calmness and kind of democratic and you know the space which is kind of open, not so much open actually in that part of the country. Is quite different from here. But when it comes to hate speech based on clan ethnics, we are same. So it's across the whole country.
Great. So we have a wonderful variety of participants here. I'm just wondering if anyone else would like to come in with a question. Giovanni, do you have a question? Yeah.
I have a lot of questions that I don't know if there are answers, because the situation has I think is quite nuanced and also multifaceted. So it's not so easy to find the right question to ask. I was impressed to hear how much diversity there is in a region, and how this approach to counter-moderation and also with hate speech raise so much issues. Especially there's so many different issues, even if we are dealing with the region that, of course, it is not small, but at least maybe usually we think that share some kind of common understanding of the problems we have talked today. And so this also leads us to what Nicola said before. So to say that so the question about what AI and content moderation systems are doing in those areas, since there is so much diversity. So I think these are questions that comes up from this debate. So and I think I can also add question on that. So also wondering about what is more the role also of social media outside, maybe in some areas of the countries where there are areas of the countries where conflicts are not so spread, like in some specific area where where the conflict actually occur. This is very close also to other problems of internet shadows, because it's interesting also to understand how social media, if they behave differently according to which area of the country we are addressing, or whether people also believes and use social media in a different way depending on where they are in the same countries, but according to different conditions in which they live. So these are all questions. I don't know if you want to jump in to add something, that since we are almost at the end of this workshop, but these are my general comments that actually has really confirmed a kind of bias that we have on what is happening actually in this area.
If I can just follow up, because I think that's a very interesting question, Giovanni, about sort of the different ecologies in terms of the use of social media and also the moderation of it. And I know, for example, and I think Kinfe also mentioned this, Facebook Live is extremely popular, and it's also very popular in the Somali territories as well. So is there any ways in which, do you have any indication that this is being moderated at all? Do you have any, I don't think natural language processing is quite up to date to handle Amharic and Somali language in terms of, tracking the speech in real time on something like Facebook Live. But do you have any indication that anything is being done about the concerns that these are being real tools for online hate speech?
Thanks, Nicholas. Okay, sorry. You can go ahead.
So what I was saying, basically, it's completely unmoderated in the context of Somalia. You can go live and say whatever you want, and write whatever you want, and it's actually one of the challenges we are having right now, especially with the diaspora communities who live far from Somalia, who sometimes go live and fuel violence that's happening in a very remote area, or even sometimes in a major city. So it's the challenge we're facing today.
Okay, if I may say a few things. The same is the case in Ethiopia. I don't think Facebook Live, as well as YouTube Live, is properly moderated. I think most of the Facebook Live streams are taken down probably at a later stage through formal reporting. That's often the case. I've seen a number of activists, YouTube and Facebook page being disabled for several weeks after volunteers reported those pages. So unless the content displays some graphic violence, so on and so forth, I don't think that automated content moderation is deployed in the Ethiopian context.
Thank you for that. We're nearing the end of our session, but I just see two questions. So I'm going to take, one colleague has his hand up, so we'll call on him. And then we have a question from Meiser in the chat to the panelists. Okay, here, let me.
Hi,
go ahead.
Everybody. Hi. So yeah, my question, actually, I wrote the question also in the chat. I was wondering, picking up on what I was saying, if there is a difference in the way hate speech is actually perceived by the Somali diaspora or by Somalis in the Somali territories. I mean, I guess that probably those in the Horn of Africa will see the effect of hate speech, while for those abroad, they feel that they could say whatever they want, and that will not have an impact in their direct life. But I wonder if, yeah, what is your experience at Ifta?
And thank you
Can
very
I
much.
take one other question with that? Can I just take a question and just let another participant to just briefly speak, and then we can answer all the questions at once? Yeah, go ahead.
Hello, do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, hello everyone. But first of all, I would like to thank the panelists. It's really great information from all of you. My question specifically for Ignio and Martin, if you see that social media platforms made the right decision with Trump because they know the context, and actually we all agree on that, do you think that the platforms should take full responsibility of governance of content? And what are the implications of such a solo role for the digital platforms if they unvoice others? How can this be conflicted with freedom of speech from your point of view? Thank you.
Great, so we can just take all of the panelists at once. So we'll start with Abdi Fattah, and then we'll go around and everyone can answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicole, and thanks to Dr. Rizalino. Good to see you. I didn't know you were in the participant list. This is a very great question. The different perspective of hate speech. Actually, there's no much difference in terms of how hate speech is perceived by Somalis inside and outside. The same conversation that's happening offline, the same clan-based hate comments and jokes that are happening offline is happening online in the digital platform. And we in one of our platforms we were actually asking and raising these concerns that especially among the diaspora communities, how come someone who lived in let's say liberal, very how do I say progressive country can share or spread this clan-based or kind of hate speech on social media platforms. Someone who is exposed. For someone who lives in the far remote area, who is fighting with a different clan, it's understandable. But someone like, for instance, who lives, it's a question that we were asking actually several times in our platforms, in our different platforms. So there's not much difference. So what's happening in the offline, it's the same thing that's happening in the online platform.
Kinfe? Virginia?
So I don't think a question is addressed to me. It's for the others.
I could just answer Maisa's question, because I would support her position. It's quite I would argue in the same way. We all are happy that Donald Trump was taken down from these platforms, but the process that happened cannot be the future. It's not right that a company somewhere in Palo Alto can decide who will be able to speak in a global public. And even this oversight board they founded, which this might be a small step in the right direction, but in the end there must be independent, in some way independent bodies, be it democratic processes of government and definition of laws, or be it some self-regulatory independent bodies who decide about issues like that. So I think there's a long way to go until we found ways of governance to deal with these kind of problems.
And if I may jump in, I don't know if Virginia want to add something on that.
Yes and no. I mean, I can retain my position, but also I realized that actually I wasn't fully, I wasn't correct on one point. Actually, Myanmar, also some of the generals that were responsible of the coup or the re-coup, they've been in power all along, their Facebook account had been disconnected. So Facebook had taken a step. And so it's a level of visibility. Of course, if these becomes like, again, we go back to where we started, Donald Trump is visible. Would they have done the same if he hadn't lost the election, if it was like 6 months before and still in power? Probably not. So the economy of that decision also should play a role. And so I would say we go back to like, so it's just the leaders of the movement that are going to be taken down, or like, where do we stop? And once you have the granular understanding of a conflict, at the same time, what I thought it was important, and the point I was trying to make is just nobody in Palo Alto should decide, but at least that decision show the relevance that they have in that debate. So they show themselves for who they actually are, not for what they tell us they pretend to be, and that was important, and they as if they took responsibility for their role, something that I don't want to do with content. We don't produce content, it's just we share content. This is not true, and all that. So the admission of responsibility was important. The process, as Martin said, is a different discussion altogether.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us for this exciting panel discussion. Thank you to all of our presenters, to our speakers, to my fellow colleagues, coordinators of this. So it was very, very interesting, and I think we have a lot to build on. Our next meeting will be on hate speech and content moderation in the Sahel region, and that will be on June 3rd. So please do join us for that. And we'll be having also a wide range of different perspectives and colleagues speaking. So thank you all. Eid Mubarak to those who are celebrating. We thank you for joining us, Abdi Fattah. I know this wasn't the ideal date for you, but we really appreciate it, and we're glad that you were able to make it. So thank you, everyone, and we'll see you again online.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.